We Are Vineyard.
That difficulty for me has more and more become what makes something feel real. We used to say when we pastored in Amsterdam, people would say, oh, I want a really organic church. And I would be like, no, you don't. You've never done anything organic. It's so much more work to do anything organic,
Yes.
But for me, that's what makes something real. And so everything in our world is moving toward entropy, right? It's falling apart. Anything real requires a move against that, which takes muscle, it takes effort. So for me, anything real requires hard work, is tangible and is visceral. And I think that we're confused in that we think, well, if faith is real, I should be able to do nothing and it will exist. Well, that's a video game. You do nothing and it exists, but it's not real. Real things take work and commitment and fervor and will never be perfect. And that image of the church, it feels weighty in a way that a lot of other things, like to your point, it's like, I could do a lot of things that are easy, but
yes,
that doesn't feel as substantial to me.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathak, National Director for Vineyard USA, talks to Julia Pickerill. Together, Julia and her husband, Eric, co-pastor the Columbus Vineyard, and Julia was one of our speakers at the Way On Conference in 2021. Let's listen in.
Well, here we are, Julia.
Indeed.
How does this happen? How does this become our life, this thing right here?
I have the past 30 years just rushing in front of my eyes, but now we're sitting in front of slightly different bookshelves.
Julia. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I
You know what I'm remembering right now, Jay?
Well, I can't wait. I was going to say mine, but you're going to say yours first.
Well,
what's yours?
I'm remembering a party at your apartment block when you guys were all lighting firecrackers and sticking them into the sides of the apartment so that they would not shoot vertically into the sky, but laterally over the street.
Yeah, at people. Yep.
For fun.
Oh, yeah, I went and bought, where did we go to? It must have been Kentucky because that's where they had the fireworks.
Yeah.
I went and bought, was it 10,000 bottle rockets? It was something like that. It was
it would be.
It filled my trunk. It was all bottle rockets. And it took me, I don't know, a few years to shoot all those off. So every time someone came home, I would shoot a bottle rocket at them. Right at them, out of my window.
Not next to them, but at them.
No. Yeah, when they were taking a shower, I would shoot one under the door.
That sounds amazing.
It was great. Yeah, that was my real life. That wasn't like a movie. That was my real life. And back then, you and Eric were the old, sophisticated, wise friends of mine that lived in a barn of sorts.
A half-renovated farmhouse, right?
And I remember coming over.
We were 23.
Exactly. But you seemed ancient to me.
Exactly.
Because you're 2 life stages ahead of me.
Mm-hmm. Married with house.
That's right. Exactly. And then you have a kid.
Mm.
So it's wow, these guys, they've got it figured out. Because I'm shooting bottle rockets at people and you're 4 life stages ahead. And when I remember going up to the farmhouse and I'm supposed to meet with Eric. And I come in and he's literally inside the floor.
Yeah, in the crawl space.
Yeah, and there's water spraying everywhere. Something had broken. And he's literally just making things up. And he's yelling at me, go over and turn that thing off. I didn't know what. And it was the first time I'd seen people who really were trying to fix their own home.
Right. And you're I didn't know that place beneath the house existed. What is this? It's not a basement.
I remember you redid your own floor. You had epoxied the floor with paper bags.
With paper bags.
Yeah.
It was very art house.
It was so awesome. No, but I remember coming in being you can do this. You can just do things. Because my home, if the door was an eighth of an inch off, my dad called someone.
Exactly.
Like, I don't even know if we had tools.
No, it's the great gift of Eric Pickerill, which is the sense that, like, of course, anything can be accomplished. Which is great. Comes in handy. You never know.
Figure it out.
We always reflect on, do you remember when he decided he wanted to call Zambia from the middle of a field at a Breathe festival?
Yes.
And we had to run both electric and like a ton of phone cable.
Yep.
But we did it. It was like before the internet.
Oh, yeah, you did it. Well, and what I also remember, it might have been that one, that I thought, drove the truck into the generator, right? And it or was it like one of the
he
wires?
He drove a U-Haul. Were you in that truck with him maybe?
I may have been, yeah.
I think you were, because he drove a U-Haul truck into the overhead power line that we had to hang to get the phone to work in the middle of it.
That's what it was. There it is. That's right.
No one could touch the truck because we were all afraid it was electrified.
Yeah, it probably was.
Yeah.
There was voltage. Yeah. So these are all things that now look at you. You're
I was going to say, now look at you, Jay. Now our future is bright. Our future is bright.
Yeah. Yeah, this is all training. We're going to call all of that training.
Like Jedi school.
I think, I could be wrong, but I think Connor, your firstborn, is the first child I held in my arms.
Yes. I bet he was. He had that distinction for many people.
Because I was, I'm an only child, as you know, no real cousins around that I watched get born or any of the things. And I remember just thinking, this is so grown up. Like, I'm still a child holding a child. Like, I can't be here. And I didn't know what to say. I had this deep sense of fidelity to my friendship to Eric and Julia. And I remember just saying, listen, because this is all I had. I'm whatever I am, 18. Listen, if something goes wrong with Connor, I will go get him anywhere.
That's amazing.
I promise. And I remember you guys being like, okay. Yeah, well, it's like complete.
Jay, I might take you up on that, all right?
Yeah, there's still time. I just remember being like, I got this, guys. I don't know how to hold this child. I can't help you in any way. But yeah, anyway.
We grew up together. I was just telling Danielle, my mother has kept many things, but I just found my dress from your wedding.
Wow.
And I was pregnant for Connor. So I had this maternity wedding dress. But I was reflecting on what a grace it is to grow up with people.
Dude, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, early married, I remember Danielle calling you on the front step like we'd had some horrible fight. And she's just like crying. And I'm like, who are you talking to? She's like, I'm calling Julia. I'm like, okay, that's probably good. This isn't going very well.
Well, both ways.
Exactly. Just to have people that all the little difficult, traumatic moments of your life aren't alone or aren't just professionals, though we have had lots of professional help, to have humans that walk with you the whole way. And yeah, it's beyond encouraging. So have you listened to any of our podcasts? You listen to this? It's okay if you haven't.
No.
That's fine.
I don't.
So here.
I read through, but I did in my preparation. You
read through the who had been on.
Yeah, and the descriptions and some of the conversations that you've been having.
Okay, good. Well,
it's like the Cliff Note version.
What we're doing right now is the way all I'm trying to do is get stories told.
Great.
It's about half are people that aren't in the vineyard. And they start to say what they think the vineyard's like from their chair, and or what they would want to say in relationship to what they have to give and sort of what God's done in their life. So it seems passe, but I would love to ask where you were born, how you grew up. That's just literally how we start.
Okay, where I was born.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's funny. I mean, it's actually not funny. I just rarely go back to when I was born.
I know. That's why it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was born around Dayton, Ohio, Good Sam Hospital. And my dad was in the Air Force, so he was at Wright Pat at the time. And I moved from there when I was little to West Germany when it was still West. So lived off base in West Germany for maybe 5 years, something like that. So grew up in kind of a bunch of different kinds of worlds. So both military, but we lived off base. So German. And my parents were, my dad came to Christ through navigators when he was at the Air Force Academy. And so they were, my folks were deeply connected into the life of the church. And in the military, you kind of just go to church with everybody. So like every random person from every random denomination kind of gets shoved into one space. So I grew up like that. And then we moved back and he continued his career mostly in Ohio. So then I moved back to Ohio and finished high school.
How old were you? Oh, so you came back when you were a freshman?
No, we came back when I was, I think, starting middle school or at the tail end of elementary school. So I was young when we lived overseas.
So up to 5th grade, you're in Germany or all over the place? In
Germany, in West Germany, yeah.
Huh. I didn't know your dad's thing with the navigators piece.
Yeah.
In the springs at the base.
At the academy, yeah. At the academy.
At the academy.
A guy called, I think, Joe Stone led my dad to the Lord, and he had a pretty significant conversion experience. And my mom was raised Catholic while they were planning to get married. It's kind of a funny story that they were supposed to commit to raising their children Catholic. And my mom was like, yeah, we can't really do that because we're not really Catholic. And the priest was like, well, just sign the paper. She was like, all right, maybe not. So then we just grew up in like a variety of traditional churches. But my earliest memories are of like Bible study in our place and people from all over the world coming together.
Wow. So, I mean, he was into it. It wasn't like he kind of came to know Jesus and, I don't know, I guess we go to church. He's like leading. No.
Yeah, my parents had and still have a really life-giving relationship with the Lord, and my father's a pretty disciplined guy, in the sense of having routine. And so always, we prayed together and grew up reading the Bible together and got baptized when I was 5 or 6, something like that. But faith was always very, very real to me. I think because I saw it in my parents' lives, but also I saw it in the community that we were surrounded with. Was, again, really diverse group of people from all over the world, but they had faith in common.
Wow, can you remember 5 or 6 it being like, because I as you know, I wasn't raised in church. So I always love hearing the church kids stories, like how some are like, no, I had this genuine reality, like something shifted, or, I really wanted ice cream. I'd seen my...
I raised my hand.
Exactly. I'd seen that my siblings got ice cream when they got baptized.
Yes.
And I just thought, I'd like some ice cream.
But there was no ice cream. The church for me was like lovely. Like I had a really weird, in some ways, maybe experience of the church, that the church felt lovely to me, the way that people treated one another. I have vivid memories of conversations about the peace of Christ, learning what the word shalom meant. When I was really little, we used to sing this song about shalom. And there was something about Jesus that I found very resonant. So I remember my little baptism class. We had little pipe cleaner people and a little bowl of water. And I remember our pastor like walking me through what it meant to be baptized. And even to this day, like we have, typically like in a church like ours, we have kind of an age range where we would suggest that you get baptized after a particular age. But I always press against it a little bit because my own experience was really vibrant for me and was very authentic. And I have memories of it. So I just think I always found like the story of and the person of Jesus to be really beautiful and very adventurous. I also grew up reading a lot. So I read Lewis and John White, and the whole sort of narrative of the kingdom and of doing something beautiful in the world. That was always a center part of where my headspace was.
So John White, you were reading like The Fight, or like what?
He wrote this I think it's a series of 3 books, almost like poetry. I think it's the singer, the song. I'd have to Google it. Like I think my parents still have it at their house.
Huh.
Yeah. Really lovely.
Huh. I've not heard of
you
that one. That's why I was like, I
probably-
didn't know. I know all the Lewis things, but I knew some of John White's stuff. But The Fight, I've gone through with a bunch of different folks on how.
Yeah, no, it's like, I'm going to
Warfare
have to find
works.
it now because I'm like, oh, and the Tower of Gabora. Like I could remember all these books that were just like so
Huh.
lovely to me. I can't remember who wrote that one, but in any case, that whole narrative of like, there's something bigger than what's right in front of you. That made perfect sense to me. And in some funny way, maybe growing up in kind of the Cold War, growing up in West Germany when East Germany was right across the border, that whole reality of the big meta stories of life were very real for me. I was kind of a geek, so I really like that stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, geeks run the world, it turns out.
Yeah, maybe.
No, they really do. I think they really do. I mean, they just do. So then in high school, were you were a Young Life
Yep.
high schooler, right? Yeah. Did that just seem like a continuation of faith, or was Young Life like a new thing? Because if you've been a church kid,
Yep.
and were you a big Walnut? Is that what?
No, so I lived in the Toledo area. My dad retired from the military.
Okay.
And so we moved from Cincinnati up to the Toledo area, which just felt like, horrible, horrible vector. Northwest Ohio. And so I went to high school. I went for my sophomore year on. I went to school up in a little suburb called Sylvania. And got connected with Young Life because, like, I think I had very, I had very strong beliefs about the frailties of the local church, and I was not very forgiving. And so I had sort of started to despise denominationalism by the time I was about 16.
Oh, that's amazing. So you've already formed.
I deconstructed in the 80s.
I don't think this is working. This church thing.
Yeah,
At
I
16.
can't remember why. I can't remember why. But Young Life for me, I loved because it was missional. I think that's what it was. Is it wasn't institutional. It was missional, and I loved that. And you want to know what's crazy is just last week, so I was preaching on Mother's Day, and this gentleman came up to me who was so familiar, but I haven't seen him in 30 years. He was a person who was a pastor who lived in the area where I started a Young Life Club 30 years ago in Maumee, Ohio. And he had just retired, and I, met him. He had just come in, and I was just thinking about like the legacy of certain things. Like we talk a little bit about having long lives and long stories with people, but also having legacy, where I was like, 30 years ago, we did this thing together, and, his daughter's doing this work now. And just, I love that sort of messy missional space. Yeah.
Well, and that's Young Life is the best of that.
I mean, totally agree with you.
We're just like going for kids. Like,
yep.
We're spending time with them. We're hanging out. We're investing in lives.
Yes. Doing like deep theology. I mean, it's just I'm really grateful for you. We have campaigners at our house every Monday.
Oh, cool.
It brings me great joy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and some of my story. I mean, Young Life, huge impact on my life and just the relational style of ministry. I just, it's almost like when I'm around people in ministry, I can tell if they cut their teeth in Young Life.
I agree.
You can almost just sense like, oh, I think you did Young Life, because they have they're really trying to be connected as much as anything else they do, which is sadly not always the case.
That's really true.
For ministry. Yeah. But okay. So then you're a Young Lifer, and then you graduate and have to like figure out how to go to college and do whatever. What do you do next?
Well, I was super smart. I went the route of getting a college degree in creative writing because I scoped out like the most lucrative and practical career plans, and that was like the top of the list.
This is going to be great. I'm going to write.
No, I did. I went to Bowling Green University, wanted to do Young Life. Like I really went because I wanted to lead Young Life. And I did I was in their BFA program, which I thought was pretty fantastic. So I did 2 years of school at Bowling Green, did Young Life, still was super snarky about the church and all of that. And then maybe in the middle of my freshman year, I met Eric at a Young Life thing, fell in love, and transferred down to Ohio State. And then we got married, and I finished up university at Ohio State while renovating the crazy farmhouse.
The farmhouse. And
yes.
Did he at this point, did he have flowing locks?
I fell in love with Eric's flowing locks. Yes.
Flowing locks.
Because the dudes in Young Life, you'll probably remember this, were often quite athletic. They were more
duty
like like the kind of jock types. And so I remember I saw Eric with his flowing locks and his skateboard. and I was like, I was all in. But at that time, I was also sort of following the Grateful Dead in the tri-state area.
Oh, okay.
That's a whole other podcast, but
yeah, it is. That's exciting.
He thought I was too much of a hippie.
Yeah.
But we turned it around.
So you were a hippie, he had flowing. Yeah, and in Young Life, you're right. You guys are
we're the outliers.
You're the edge. Yeah, you're not a cheerleader. Mm-mm. He's not a jock. Yeah, you don't quite fit.
Right.
Yeah, I get it.
You were a golfer, right? You golfed.
I was a basketball player then.
There we go. Okay.
Still a tennis player. Yeah, I was definitely a jock. I mean, my big conversion was coming to the Vineyard. When I walk into the first small group that, of course, became Joshua House.
Yeah.
It's like at the end of the group, everyone pulled out guitars and like little drums and stuff. I had never, I had never been near someone playing an instrument in my life.
That's awesome.
Like not one time. Mm-hmm. I'd not been I didn't have a musician friend. Mm-hmm. I mean, I maybe knew a couple guys or kids, and I just was like, what foreign land have I entered into?
Yes.
And they were so serious, It's like really. And I didn't mind the intellectual seriousness because, I was studying philosophy and stuff because I like the discussing, the cutting it up and thinking. Mm-hmm. But the sort of artistic, how do you feel about how you feel? Mm-hmm. And then let's sing a song about that. I was like, I don't know what this is.
Let's write a song about that.
No, I'm serious. That initial small group, regularly people would bring songs that they had written. And I remember it was like I was watching some kind of a fiction story. I'd never heard of people like this. Like there's people that write songs and then play them for their friends. Like, what is this?
It's church.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we call it, I guess. But it was all new to me. Okay, so then you marry the Fabio flowing locks man known as Eric Pickerill.
Yep.
How did you guys fumble into the Vineyard?
Yeah, so we were doing Young Life together and working at a Presbyterian church doing youth ministry, which is just another whole funny reality, but lovely Presbyterian church led by a pastor who was a poet and a writer and, very high-minded. And I think at a certain point that everything felt very lofty, it was beautiful, but felt very lofty. And a woman that we worked with named Kelly had actually, we worked at the Presbyterian church. She had moved out to this area from the West Coast as a part of a Vineyard church plant. And it had not gone the way that she had planned. And so she ended up working at this Presbyterian church. And at one point, Kelly says, have you guys ever heard of the Vineyard? And we said, no, that sounds weird. And, she said, oh, I think you'd really like it. And so Kelly, who's now Kelly Messick, who's still a pastor on our staff, brought us over into the Vineyard, and we didn't know what it was. I think the first thing that we went to, we thought it was remember we used to call it the young adult service?
Oh, yeah.
Before Joshua House, but I think they had bumped the young adult service to have a congregational meeting. And so we showed up at the congregational meeting and went through the budget, but we were so impressed because everything was so pragmatic, which cracks me up. I remember saying I was so impressed by the building because it was utilitarian, which is like, it's just its own thing. But we were part of this really lofty sort of esoteric, Presbyterian community. And then to come to a place where it was like, we give money to the poor and we do work of mercy and justice. And the building is the way it is so that people can access it and it's usable. That was radical. And we loved it. And then we came back to a John Wimber Power Healing Conference and had no idea what we were coming to. And that was for me where things like clicked, like, oh, okay, there's like a whole, I had grown up in faith. I knew the Bible. I grew up like a discipled kid, and I came to a point where I was like, I kind of feel like I know all there is to feel. And then I came into the Vineyard and I was like, oh. So the kingdom for me was like the thing that I knew I was missing, but I didn't know what I was missing.
And so prior to that, how would you have understood healing, an encounter with God, hearing God's voice? Would that have just been sort of an empty set? It wasn't
I think there
negative.
Maybe in three different ways. In one way, it was sort of negative linked to hyper charismatic experiences, like scary, weird.
Right. Yeah.
Number two, it would have been just completely unread. I remember going back and reading my Bible and realizing I just had underlined almost every verse except for anything to do with that stuff. And then, but the third thing is that I did grow up with missionary friends. I still remember Mr. and Mrs. Takalaklu. And so when our missionary friends would come to visit us, like in Germany, for instance, and if we were sick, they would pray for us. And I remember Mr. Tak praying for me, praying in tongues, actually, when I was very young. And that to me felt very real, but it felt like something that missionaries might do.
Right.
It felt completely inaccessible. But that personal experience was kind of intriguing, but very distant. So I had zero framework.
Yeah. So it's something that people might do in some faraway place.
Yeah.
But not with me, not here, not now.
No. And if it's here now, it fits in a category of very, very, very weird.
Right. So then what made the Vineyard experience different than that? Like as you're watching Wimber do whatever he's doing and the power healing things, what made you go, wait a minute, there's a world here for me to explore? Or did you at first go, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be, these freaking weirdos. I got to get out of here.
A little bit. Like I remember feeling somewhat viscerally uncomfortable. Like I need to, and I'm going to take the position of an observer. I remember being impressed by the way that Wimber was completely unemotional. That like it was very clear there was no hype person in the room. I think secondly, there was this sort of intellectual / theological framework that he set. Again, the language of the kingdom, the now and the not yet, the holding of the tensions, the sort of reality of the intersection of the kingdom of God. It made cognitive sense to me. Like, oh yes, this isn't just about emotionalism. This is kind of a different way of seeing the world. And then I had a personal encounter with the Holy Spirit. And, I had this moment of like, I just trust myself to the degree to like, I'm not going to fake this. Like there's nothing in me that wants to have any sort of physical manifestation. And I just felt very, very profoundly the physical presence of something greater than myself in a way that was super impactful. And
do you remember what year is that? Can you remember?
That's a good question. It would have maybe been, I don't know, 96-ish, 95-ish.
95, yeah.
94-ish?
That sounds about right.
Like at the very front end. Yeah, it was right between, we eventually stepped out of ministry at that church with much grace and encouragement from our pastor there, and then came into the Vineyard. And I think Eric did the first like VLI back when it was Vineyard Leadership Institute.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So you step out of that and you do Vineyard Leadership Institute. Is that when Eric gets hired to be an intern?
Eventually. We were actually about to go on staff with Young Life. So I was about to be hired as an area director in the Chicago area. And Eric was thinking about doing seminary. And it's one of these like bizarre stories. We had, we wrote a letter to Rich and the next day got a reply back in the day where it was like real letters on real paper. We still have them asking for his counsel. And then ended up meeting with him on a Friday. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anybody outline a theology of the local church, was in my meeting with Rich. And he did so respectfully, but and in a way that was really compelling for me, that I, really did help address not the reality. Like, there's a lot of great reasons to be snarky about the local church, but I think it gave me a deeper fundamental buy-in that I think, regardless of all the wonkiness, I think this is the thing that we're meant to be a part of. And that was very impactful for us. And then, and then we were about to take a job, and he offered Eric an internship. Then it made Eric do middle school ministry with you.
Eventually with me.
Eventually with you.
Yeah,
so,
he sucked me in.
And then I started working for Danny Meyer. I worked as a secretary for Danny Meyer. So we, instead of going out to do Young Life, we just kind of threw all our chips in here.
Well, and so let me back up. Like, when he did a theology of the local church, that's an interesting thing, because you've been a church kid. So it's not like this is an unfamiliar topic.
Certainly, yeah.
You've had favorable experiences, though you're also a little like, this thing's kind of dumb in some ways that doesn't make sense to me. It's not as missional as I hope it would be, and blah, blah, blah. You're influenced and impacted by Young Life and all these positive ways. What can you remember about that? Because like right now, listening, there's any number of folks that could be in any one of those categories. Yeah. Like, hey, this is kind of a safe, nice thing, but it's not very missional. Or, I mean, if I'm going to do real ministry, don't I have to like leave a church, or at least this church? I got to get out of here to do something that would maybe really impact fill in the blank kids, or single moms, or youth, and it might have just been a God thing. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just the way God was setting you up. But can you remember any of the moves or the components of it? Because it wasn't an unfamiliar topic.
No, you're right.
What is it that struck you?
But I don't know that I had it wasn't something that I thought a lot about. I remember being very caught by the idea that the church is the mystery of Christ in the world. And that all of the things, on the one hand, that seemed wonky, on the other hand, seemed sort of like impossible in the best way. That, right? If this is the mystery of Christ, then it's mysterious, and mysterious things are always a bit sideways and complex. And so the things that had seemed maybe like the negative components, I feel like I began to understand those complexities as worthwhile and really important to my own formation. In other words, it's like, sure, it's weighty, but if you lift it, you'll get stronger. There was a weightiness to, I think, the New Testament vision of the local church that accounted for some of the things, the dissonances that I felt. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't have to mean that the whole thing doesn't work. Maybe it's a part of it, and part of my work can be to navigate in that space. I remember Rich outlining, this idea of like the gift of institution at certain points, that some ministries, like, they're in your life for 3 years or for 4 years, and then they're gone. There are very few things that are in our lives that could be in our lives from like the time you have a baby to the time you go to the grave. And that this vision of the church isn't so much like, I like it, it makes me happy, what a super message that was. It's more, this is my habit of being that is meant to stay with me and stay cohesive from the very youngest to the very oldest. And I don't know that there is anything in our world that exists with that kind of, at least, potential or design. I mean, everything is temporary. And that for me was also really compelling, to be a part of something that was meant to just keep existing. And I think some of the ministries that I had been involved with were very excellent, but I saw how they could be limited. Like, they would be really excellent at community for like 3 or 4 years in someone's life, but then it just didn't work, because and the idea of the workability of the local church, it was just compelling to me. That, and it felt like profoundly biblical. I was like, oh, I actually think this is how it's supposed to be, whether I like it or not.
Well, yeah. And what, to your point, I love how you said that the mystery, it's almost like if it worked just perfectly and was easy, it might not be worth it. Like,
totally.
Like anything that anyone's ever done that's worth it in their life is complicated and hard. And has a sense of permanence.
Yes.
There's an intention, and
yes.
it
And
doesn't
I think
come easy.
that difficulty for me has more and more become what makes something feel real. So we used to say when we pastored in Amsterdam, people would say, oh, I want a really organic church. And I would be like, no, you don't. You've never done anything organic. It's so much more work to do anything organic,
Yes.
But for me, that's what makes something real. And so everything in our world is moving toward entropy, right? It's falling apart. And so anything real requires a move against that, which takes muscle, it takes effort. So for me, anything real requires hard work, is tangible and is visceral. And I think that we're confused in that we think, well, if faith is real, I should be able to do nothing and it will exist. Well, that's a video game. You do nothing and it exists, but it's not real. Real things take work and commitment and fervor and will never be perfect. And that image of the church, I really, and I've wrestled with it like a lot,
Yeah.
I still wrestle with it, but that vision for me, it feels weighty in a way that a lot of other things, like to your point, it's like, I could do a lot of things that are easy, but
Yes.
that doesn't feel as substantial to me.
Every month on the We Are Vineyard podcast, we introduce a new book or recommended resource to dig in deeper. For May, we're recommending that everyone reads Miracle Work by Jordan Sang. Later this month, we'll interview Jordan to hear a deeper dive on his book and much more. Miracle Work is available through Vineyard Resources and wherever books are sold.
No, there's almost nothing you do in your life that's easy that is permanent and and creates lasting change.
Right.
Like nothing. If that's how it worked, we would just do those things.
Exactly.
But it doesn't work that way. And to your point, for all the great things I love about my parachurch ministry friends, each one of them would say, oh man, but we're not the church.
Right.
The healthiest among them would say,
Exactly.
we're not the church. We're not going to walk someone through their cancer.
Right.
We're not going to do that. We're not going to sit with them when their kid has died. We're not going to be the person they call when they're sitting on the front stoop because they've had their first horrible fight when they're married or whatever.
Right.
Like we can't do all those things. What we do is this thing. We do this one bit,
and
which
it's
is
wonderful.
super useful.
Yes. Yeah.
It's great and it's important and we need people to do all the little bits. But I don't other than family, which is probably why it's one of the greatest kind of pictures of the church is family. But other than family, I don't think there's anything that even attempts that kind of permanence and
Not at all.
sustainability over time, which is pretty audacious when you think about it.
It is.
And it's probably why it is so messy and painful and awkward and doesn't always go the way we want it to. And
Exactly.
two pastors talking to each other and
I'm always like, you want to have a conversation about the church. You don't want to go there with me.
Yeah, well, exactly.
you think you can be whatever but I think, and part of it is it is an issue of calling. I think part of it's also an issue of vision. And I do think that part of it is an issue of what, language right now is kind of a funny thing, but there's plenty of things that we might call church. And, it's like, is the thing what it's meant to be in its heart? I don't know. It's not mine to judge. It's mine to do my work where I am. But I think there's lots of good reasons that people are frustrated and feel disenfranchised.
Of course. Yes. But you and I are both impacted, of course, by Rich and Marlene and their life and their ministry. That's why it's so interesting listening to you, because it's hard, I think, in the work that we do to keep that vision in front of you. Like, this thing has been built and designed and made by God for the sake of like something very, very beautiful that extends beyond us. And we can get caught in the nitty gritty, or we're managing the most broken components of a group of people. But it's a great reminder to me, even just listening to you right now, like how important it is to look at people from time to time and say, can I tell you what I think we're doing? Yeah. Can I tell you what I think the vision is like? Yeah. I know we just had to figure out whatever, this messy thing with marriages in our church, or this really complicated dynamic around somebody who's really hurt or frustrated at a thing they wanted or expected from us, or we've walked through this horrible tragedy with somebody's life, and then at the end of it they just leave your church anyway. You've done all this stuff, and then they're like, I think I'll just go somewhere else. And you're like, what? I thought we were a family, like we did all this together. But really it's their grief is beyond what they know how to manage. They like, I can't be here, this is where I came with my wife, or my kid was climbing on those chairs over there, and now they're gone. I got to go somewhere else. And you're like, what?
Yeah. When I think a lot about how pastors and leaders, we kind of live our lives in the deepest part of the oceans. And I think sometimes we forget that there is a shore. Yeah. Like I was having this conversation with someone. I'm like, they're, moving to a different church, which there's plenty of wonderful churches, but it happened to have a very different theology on women in leadership. So I was like,
interesting.
Does the theological framework of that, like, do you care about that? Is that something that's in your mind? Because for me, that would be like, there's plenty of things about what a church might believe, or that's really important to me. And it was like, no, like it's that. So this sense of depth, and not depth in a pejorative way that one is better than the other, but we all exist in different depths of this entity. And so sometimes I'm like, I always realize like I'm not fun at parties because I'm really bad at small talk, because I live in this like weird, deep space that has to do with like faith and mystery. And sometimes people are just like, I don't know, it's like a closer drive to my house.
Exactly. Well, or I met two people that I like hanging out with, and that's where they go. And my kids like their kids. Yeah,
exactly. And you're like, well, that's okay. That's
yeah, that works for me. And that's all that's literally as far as it's gone. And I've had the same experience where people will move from a Catholic church to a Pentecostal church to a Presbyterian church to an Acts 29 church, and then they're in the Vineyard. And I'm like, do you understand the complexities that you just went through? And they're like,
nope.
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, y'all have stuff for kids, each one of you.
Exactly.
Y'all have some kind of barbecue that I can go to in the summer.
Game on.
Y'all talk about Jesus. Every one of you does something about Jesus. You bring the Bible up. Some of you are funnier than others. Sometimes your sermons are shorter or longer.
Exactly.
I like the music over there better than over here. That's it. That's all I can tell. And which can make you pretty cynical as a pastor. You're like honing, this really thoughtful theological.
I spent 12 minutes on half a sentence of his sermon, perfecting the nuance and the tone
of this theological thing. And they're
right.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems fine. It's all fine. Yeah. Okay. So you end up pulled in, and then let's talk a bit about, because then I'm doing middle school with Eric, which is like catastrophically crazy.
Hysterical.
We're just doing all the things that you can't do anymore. I don't think you're allowed to swallow a goldfish anymore.
No.
Probably go to jail.
I think you might. Or you'd have like protesters in front of you.
Yeah, it'd be over. You'd be done. You'd be canceled.
That would be bad.
Yeah, somebody would YouTube it, and that would be it. You'd be done. Stuff like that. So we're doing all that stuff. Youth group's growing. You're doing the stuff with Danny. Give the moves towards Joshua House, because, around the Vineyard anyway, and maybe this is true for you, maybe it's not, that's the number one thing people ask me about
Yeah.
from my story. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
What happened there? And I got to be honest with you, I'm always at a bit of a loss because I wasn't in all of the initial pieces, obviously.
Yeah.
But it does feel mysterious to me because at the
agree.
time, it just felt like the next thing. Like, okay, I'll do this small group and then I'll build another small group and then I guess I'll show up and teach this class or whatever. But now in retrospect, having led church for a while, those things are really hard to do.
Yeah.
Like, people generally don't show up.
No,
to
and
stuff.
it's very rare. Very, very rare.
Exactly.
Very rare.
Like let's put it this way. We've not done anything like that in Denver.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen like that.
No, and I think, I would agree. I still have, I regularly, and this was 25 years ago, I regularly have folks say that was probably the most impactful time in my life. I've not been able to replicate. One of the things that we even struggle with a little bit for our staff is the folks who don't know what that is can feel like I missed out on this big, like, I don't know what it was. I don't know what Joshua House was, but it was a thing.
Yeah.
I always go back to this line that Mark Tyndall used at the very beginning. And it was kind of like it was like our tagline, but it was God is gathering a generation.
Yeah.
And I remember coming in for the first, there was no young adult ministry. Maybe that's a context. So Eric and I were doing youth ministry. So we were either 10 years younger or 10 years older than all our friends. And I would say in the church context that I was aware of, there was no such thing as a youth church or young church, or it just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And so it felt to me like there was a season of time where, for no good reason, a lot of really remarkable young people started to move, and they showed up at Vineyard Columbus. And people moved from all over for all sorts of reasons: hurt by the church, not hurt by the church, full of vision, Christian, not Christian. And somehow they coalesced in this space. And to me, I just reflect on it, and I think there was something really holy that was happening, that was really providential. I think Mark and Barb Tyndall and their commitment to be servant leaders at a great cost was monumental. And I think that there was a collective of people in our early 20s who wanted something more and who began to just fall in love with one another, but also to have a really amazing time. I had so much fun.
Yeah.
And everything that we did was, even the most bizarre, odd, bad things. I think we laughed so hard in those years. We took the Bible at its word. We were fools for Christ. Like, we kind of bought the kingdom thing. And I think that was a really remarkable formational experience for a lot of people. And as I reflect back on it, I do think that maybe in some way it was just like the providence of God, and it's borne fruit for our movement in funny, unexpected ways that I think goes beyond any of our investment in it. That maybe it was just one of those sort of moments that the Lord stirs up, and we got lucky enough to be there. Whenever my life right now feels like daunting or annoying, or, my work is complex, as is yours, and people go, "How are you doing?" And one of the things I often say is, like, I've had so much ministry in my life that was just nothing but resonant, nothing but sweetness, nothing but joy. It's okay if my work is a little bit hard right now.
Yes.
It's okay.
Yes.
And I count Joshua House as one of those seasons.
Oh, well, and in sort of a sociological way, or if we were more just boringly scientific, I agree with you with Mark and Barb Tyndall. When I look back, I think about the Columbus Vineyard being positioned in Rich's vision for like a training church. Yeah. So what that does is it creates this vineyard leadership culture that, even as you just described, pulls you guys in through an internship, through a process, through actual training, which actually gets Mark and Barb to move to Columbus. So there's already this sense that, like, hey, the job of our church is to train and develop and send leaders. That's what we're doing. So once you've made that as a fundamental commitment, and I think back on like the thousands of hours invested by those key leaders.
Yes.
Whether it's Danny, Rich, and then of course later Craig Hesselton.
Yep.
You know, those guys going, you know what, we're just going to sit with younger folks who are kind of dumb about everything and think they're great and just talk through stuff. We're just going to talk through the Bible. We're going to talk through leading a service. We're going to talk through developing leaders. And we're just going to spend thousands of hours, not with people that can necessarily even help us with the work.
Exactly.
But just learn. They're just here to learn, and we're just here to teach, and we're just going to keep doing that. So you have this like fertile ground where humans who want to learn are together,
right.
number one, and they're of a certain age. Then there's sort of a sovereign move of God, as you're describing, where some of these folks start to crash into the kingdom. And I think back on like Rich, Danny, those folks saying, you know what, we're going to give enough leash for these guys to just try stuff.
Yes.
So we're going to like just give them a key to the building. They're going to walk in, blow out some speakers. I mean, I remember some of those early days.
Yes, totally.
You would walk through what amounted to a tunnel of smoke to come into the service. Like it's like every like sort of Christian alternative band in Columbus is all out front smoking, like a tunnel of smoke. And I'm trying to think like, okay, how does that impact the actual, like the large church that pays all the bills, right? Like if someone in the church shows up, just, I don't know, to drop off a check for their tithe or something, and there's this tunnel of smoke, there's these people sort of rolling around who look all Gen X-y and Nirvana-like, you wouldn't blame them if they were like, what is this?
Yeah, exactly.
And then they're even looking around like, where's Rich? Where's Danny? Oh, they don't even come.
They don't even show up.
They don't even show up.
Yeah.
Like the amount of trust that's given is stunning to me. But again, without the training environment, without already having a healthy church that can sort of already pay the bills and take some risks.
Exactly.
Then to like have someone like Mark and Barb who are a little older but have made huge sacrifices to be in that training environment, and then they sacrifice more and say, okay, yeah, we'll help out with this thing. Like those preconditions, the ones I'm describing.
I agree.
Forget about like the sovereign move of God stuff, because that also happens. Those preconditions are really risky.
They are.
And rare. And it takes a ton of work to just build the church that can even host that kind of thing.
It does. That's a good point.
Like,
and I think
like
it's
that's a lot.
The risk is a good point too, because it's also budget, right? It's like budget, reputation. It takes a long view and a bit of a wrestle. And I think, Rich has always had such a high, I think he loves coaching and mentoring. He just, that's what he's doing now, and he's brilliant at it and loves it. But I think that mindset of I love to give away.
Yep.
And maybe to some degree, it's like not even a virtue, but it's just like a personality trait of like, yeah, I'm not going to pay too much attention. Like, I'm not going to get all worried about the
totally.
details.
I don't want to mess with this.
Yeah. Don't tell me what's going on. I don't need to know. And just like opening up space like that.
Well, I just don't think I realized, because he was around my age now.
I know, which is crazy, right?
And so I think to myself, I remember coming in Saturday mornings to do this like mentoring thing around like the Bible and like leadership. Okay, so I'm 45 now, right? I've got my kids. I don't want to show up Saturday morning every week. I mean, my kids have like sports stuff and I've been working all week, and this is like the one time my kids are home. And I remember thinking even then, like, this is so early. I remember it was like 7 or something. It felt like it was dark out. But now I look back and I go, well, that's probably the time he could do it.
Exactly.
He could do it at 7.
Get home for breakfast.
Yeah, that's right. He would get home for breakfast and go to the soccer game or go to the baseball game. And
Well, I don't mean to
That's a
interrupt
big
you.
commitment.
It is, and you're saying something that I think is really important, because I think it used to be, I would say back in the day, that there wasn't a tremendous amount of space where we could get that. You had to show up at 7:00 on a Saturday morning. And I think one of the things that I'm noticing a lot right now when it comes to teaching and discipleship is that it's the exact opposite is true. You can get this information anytime, but like the embodied connection is so undervalued. And I think it'll swing back. I think it will swing back. But I think we have, in some ways, such an interesting experience now where people can get all of that information and content, and even in sort of a didactic kind of way and all of that. But just the kind of like, waking up early and like everybody looking tired in a room together. There's something really different about embodied community that seems less essential now, but I think is maybe more essential. That I think in part that was also a component, which was like there wasn't like a million different podcasts or a million different people saying these kinds of things, or
exactly.
It felt like kind of a very rare opportunity.
It was so rare. And if I'm going to be really, like, this could sound rude, so I don't know how to say it in a way it's not rude. So I'll just say
Bring it on.
Hopefully people can be nice to me. I mean, if I think through all those rooms I was in with like a Rich and a Danny, honestly, 80% of those people didn't become all the things we would imagine people could become, right? Like sometimes I think we want to tell the story like, and all this investment bore all this fruit and it was like 1-to-1.
Oh yeah, no.
But I even think about how many of the folks we were on staff together with that like went through just horrible tragedies in their own faith, and like the kind of mess that is around and within and throughout. And how many of those folks then maybe even 10 or 15 or 20 years later kind of come back into life with God. I mean, so there is tons of redemption. But it's not like, when I think back on even those investments made by those folks, it wasn't like they were precisely planting the seeds. We always want to tell the story differently backward, like when I just knew this person had a call in their life or whatever.
Yeah.
The truth is, even in the preaching mentoring, because again, Eric is his intern, ends up doing middle school stuff, ends up moving towards Joshua House. I end up being Rich's intern while doing middle school in Joshua House. I'm in those preaching classes, and it was like 2/3 of the people, it was like they had no idea what, it was just a debacle,
Totally.
And either out of gifting or competency or effort or maturity, I don't know. Who knows? I don't know how you add up all the math on that. But when I look back, it was just a scattering.
Yeah.
Rich's and Danny, they're just investing widely. And then a few things sort of pop up along the way, and then some things kind of melt down,
We're talking about that principle a lot around here right now, just the principle of God's reckless love. We usually look at the sower, and we look at the different kinds of soil, in the parable. But when you look at the reckless extravagance of the farmer, who's just like I just had to plant a bunch of grass, and I hate planting grass. It's like the third time I've tried to plant grass in this stupid trampoline-ridden area of my backyard, and it's like I'm literally dumping it by the bucket full at this point. I'm like, I don't care how much this stuff costs. Like,
totally,
just grow,
fix it, right?
And there's just this thing in that parable about like the throwing out of so much of the seed gets wasted. And I even remember back early, I think when we were deciding on the name Joshua House, either Rich or Danny or Mark or one of those guys who felt like a sage at the time, I remember who was sitting around the table, and there was a conversation that sounded like this. I know you're all really on fire for the Lord right now, and I know you're really feeling like you guys, you want to take a hill or whatever, but if you don't guard your heart and care for your soul, half of you aren't going to be sitting in these spaces in 20 years. Because
I remember that.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
And this thing of like, for one reason or another, the energy that brings you here doesn't keep you here. The adrenaline that brings you here doesn't keep you here. And so I think not just a sort of willingness to sort of mentor widely and broadly, but also with the awareness of, life comes to people we don't know. We don't know what people's journeys will look like. And so we do the thing that's in front of us. And what's in front of us, if you're a leader, is to keep planting, I guess.
Yes. Well, and I remember thinking, because I think that was a message I heard more than once, obviously, with them. Mm-hmm. I remember thinking, these old guys are just so sad.
Yes.
Cynical.
I know.
These poor old guys, they just
need a break.
They just don't see how awesome and intentional and on fire we are.
Exactly.
We are going to just leap over valleys. They cannot see. And what's so great about that is I see the same thing now, right? You know, I've got my little group of church planters or folks we train and stuff. And as I'm talking, I'm watching, I can see their minds moving, just like looking at them. And I'm thinking, okay, I guess this is just like the way it works.
Yeah, just the speech.
It is, yeah. But it's the one that I can return to later.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so I was praying for you this morning. I have one thing. I know we've taken a lot of time, so let's finish here.
Sure.
What I would love to hear from you, because you talking about the heart for the local church, and of course, then you guys go and plant in Amsterdam. You come back. I mean, you've just done so much exciting stuff. And it relates to what we were just talking about. So I was praying for you this morning, thinking about our time talking. I'd love for you to make a case for me, or tell me how you're thinking about these days, being in a place for a long time. Here you are back. I mean, the stories we're telling are really old, right?
Yeah.
And now you're leading the very thing that you walked into a congregational meeting and watched.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but my experience of pretty much every leader I know is part of the way you grow is to just keep bouncing around. But you, like me, have found your way back into the same rooms. I mean, I've only been in 2 churches my whole life.
Yeah, it's funny.
Do you know what I mean? I don't have, which is what I'm beginning to realize is really strange.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? I mean, do you ever have moments where you're like, I cannot believe I'm still showing up at this same little bit of real estate?
Totally.
Like where you're sitting right now is the exact plot of land you showed up at.
I do.
In 95.
I mean, I feel like I have a bit of the best of both worlds because I've been able to stay really connected, but also get really differentiated. Yes. And I think being abroad was a part of that, being in Amsterdam. And for me, that's a really important component of it's hard for me to imagine the kind of proximity that's 40 years in the same place, never having left, never thinking about, never, I guess, experiencing something different. So when I think about staying, I mean, I'm a balancer by nature. So I think about when people are constantly flighty or in a lot of corporate world right now, the only way you get promotion, right, is just these horizontal hops, You
just got to move all the time. Right.
And, I mean, that works. You get a lot of diversity of experience. But when it comes to our spiritual formation, that I think is profoundly lacking. I think there is something of an anchor that we need. And this is for me, where embodiment, we're creaturely. We know each other through years and seasons and decades, not through months and weeks. We know each other deeply, not through Twitter. We there is this time, the slow human time is really important to me. So not to get too weird, but without longevity, we start more and more to live in just what I would call a simulacrum. It's not real. We live in spaces that aren't real. We communicate in ways that aren't real, and we're known in ways that aren't fully real. And I think that's really troubling. On the other hand, only having longevity and never having any opportunity to kind of get differentiated and grow is, I think, also limiting.
Yep.
For me, having 20-year stories and 30-year stories and 30-year friendships is really meaningful. So it helps me know who I am. It helps me be able to be profoundly accountable to people, not just in a shallow way, but in a way that they're Yeah, we've had this conversation for 30 years. I mean, with
Yes.
Danielle, like I might see her once a year and we can have, you know, a profoundly real human transformational conversation because we just have so much history together. That I think is becoming more and more rare. But
Yes.
I think as I read New Testament scripture that it's so much a part of what is meant to be the church that I struggle to understand how the church will stay the church without that thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't think too much about it. I'm kind of a pragmatist. And so people move around a ton and it's like, okay, we'll be faithful in this moment. But I'm becoming more and more, and as I feel like I'm an old lady, but I get more and more inclined toward the defense of the institution. Whereas I
Yes.
used to hate institutionalism because it's slow and it's self-protective and all those things. But without institution, we're just left with our own like whim. And I know my own whim enough to know like, dude, I do not want to be led by that for very long.
Yeah.
And so I guess when I think about being back here, it feels like it also an opportunity to serve in a space where I was really well served. And it feels really healthy to me to be in a place where I have had that opportunity to go and to grow, to see different things and to be challenged. But the longevity of story and of being known is really important to me.
I read an article somewhere recently. I'm trying to dial it up. Some as a result of COVID, some as a result of how the real estate markets have gone crazy in large cities. The amount of people that are going home, so to speak, is really high.
Yeah.
20 years later, 15 years later. And as I was reading that, I thought about how this migration could be a real kingdom opportunity. You know, people who have discovered a different kind of faith out and about with life with Jesus, who are then going home going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going home. Like, because I can't afford to live in San Francisco or New York or Denver. But I mean, the simple way of saying it would be church planting, but it's more kingdom planting. It's like bringing that life with you
Yes.
into whatever church you're a part of and or just into your life with your family. And the word used there is, of course, one, you know, I'm obsessed with differentiation. You know, the ability to be completely defined and yet completely connected. So I'm going to be exactly who I am, but I'm going to be entirely curious and caring about you and aware of what you care about and don't care about, and how I impact you is something I really pay attention to, and how you're impacting me I'm paying attention to. And I might even change in relationship to that, but that's my choice, not like something that it's coercive. Man, the thought that we could, in this sort of migration, watch a lot of people go home.
Yeah.
And bring the kingdom to where they're at home. And that could be church planting, or it could be just helping the body. I mean, the amount of New Yorkers I'm meeting all over the country right now, for example.
Exactly.
Or people from San Francisco.
We're seeing the same
LA.
thing here. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Like people go home because they kind of have to in one sense. But could it be something God uses?
And could you carry, you know, maybe a final thought is just that once you've differentiated, I think you have a capacity for greater confidence and greater humility both at the same time.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with John Anais Inazu, who wrote Confident Pluralism, about this idea that kind of the more sure we are of ourselves, the more weight that we give, like the sense of this is what I like, this my way, I follow the way of Jesus. It just is what it is. Like I can be differentiated in that space and I can carry it with great weight. But that also allows me to show up in a really humble, non-defensive way. It's like, I don't have anything to prove.
Yes.
I have a way, I walk my way. And some of that, sometimes we can't do that if we stay home for forever, because we're always, we're all, you know, it's just, we're always defensive about things. But I've found that to be true in my own life, that I have a lot more humility after going, because I feel like, I have solidarity and great confidence in my core convictions, but it just feels easier to hold them humbly, and I don't feel as intimidated by those who disagree. And I think that posture is surprising and and odd for many. But I like your point that coming home might create some spaces for folks to be able to sit. It's really missional, right? It's like,
yes.
And again, I went and I know that my way is the way of Jesus. My walk is the walk of Jesus, but I can hold that with great humility. And that for me is really beautiful. That's like planting the kingdom right there.
Well, and I'm struck, Julia, by how many specifically vineyard pastors are leading in churches and in areas that they've come home to.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, it's happening a lot.
Interesting.
And even a lot of our church planting. And this is happening outside the vineyard.
Mm-hmm.
How many folks were in, for example, a church in university, and then they're going back home and going, maybe I should plant a church. They lead a small group on accident and they end up with a church.
Right.
That's happening in a lot of denominational settings, not just in the vineyard. And so this horrible thing of COVID and real estate and the weird job market and the way Zoom has made it so people can work wherever they want has seemed kind of disembodied and strange. But in a weird twist, it's making people more embodied.
Yeah.
Because they're back where they were and they're around high school friends and they're going to the restaurant they used to go to, but they're still working in New York.
Right.
and they're kind of bringing their faith that they found maybe in another place home. Anyway, I just think it's an incredible opportunity. And you guys, you and Eric, of course, embody a willingness to do it's a beautiful job you've been given to lead the Columbus Vineyard, but a really difficult job in that it's a complex thing. You were in Amsterdam, being able to plant this church. If you've never been to Amsterdam, I love where I'm from, Columbus, but it's different than Columbus. It's different.
Still miss it every day. I do.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a choice you made, I think, by the calling of God. But I'm so grateful for your leadership and the ways you help lead the whole vineyard and the way you're embodying that. The legacy of investment, the kinds of ways you're investing in residencies and training of leaders. You're just continuing the legacy, and it's a choice you didn't have to make. And I'm really grateful that you're leading our movement accordingly. So I took a lot of your time, so I'll let you go, but I'd love to be able to come back and talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great. Sometime. It's a pleasure, and we're really grateful for you, Jay. I'm just really grateful for the yes that you and Danielle have said as well. As I always say, in God's providence and his great sense of humor.
Amen. Dude, tell me about it.
Here we are.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, and I do. And like you, I know that we're called.
Yeah, good.
But that doesn't remove any of the complexity.
Truly.
It's a lot to learn.
We keep you in our prayers.
Well, thank you. And I feel really honored to do it. Well, okay, I'll let you go about your day.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Julia.
Bye-bye.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.